In the physical universe, the circle pattern dominates all shapes. For example, if you were to step to the edge of the universe, it would resemble soap bubbles. As you move towards the Earth, notice the circular pattern forming in every aspect of our journey. And as we enter the Earth, notice how the circular pattern continues right down to the atomic level. And this circular pattern can be found in everyday human relationships. You must have heard the old saying, "What goes around comes around." It was Mark Twain who voiced his opinion when he noticed that life generally followed a circular pattern. In my own experiences, when I was searching for an Asian girlfriend, I made a trip to Calgary in 2007, which was a fact-finding trip. And when I made the same trip again in 2009, I noticed that some of the same events had occurred again. My first trip to Calgary I took by train. My second I took by an aircraft. My first trip I needed a rental car to get from Edmonton to Calgary. My second trip my friend used his car. You may have heard of the 1970s comedic group Cheech and Chong. There's Cheech Meredith from the United States and Tommy Chong from Canada. Tommy Chong's mother being Chinese. Well, he grew up in Calgary. And when I arrived in Calgary the first time, Tommy Chong was doing an interview on the radio, which I heard. And the second time I went to Calgary, Tommy Chong had arrived in Calgary, where he was to conduct a television interview, which I missed. During my first trip to Calgary, I had to leave early and come back again. And on my second trip to Calgary, I had to leave early and come back again. On my first trip to Calgary, I didn't meet any Asian women. On my second trip to Calgary, I met one Asian woman. The summer before I had left for my first trip to Calgary, I had attended a Rolling Stones concert, a stadium concert. On my second trip to Calgary, I had attended a stadium concert the summer before. It was Paul McCartney. And Paul McCartney was a member of the Beatles, which were rivals during the 1960s of the Rolling Stones. And there once again is a similarity of history repeating itself in slightly different situations. This chart will show you the basic similarities with the minor differences. Now at the macrocosm level, let's examine another event in history that took place twice. The Vietnam War as compared to the Iraq War with regards to the United States. Originally, during the 1950s, the North Vietnamese were friendly towards the United States and wanted to adopt some of their governmental procedures because they had admired the United States. And the United States turned on the North Vietnamese because they feared expansionism. The United States felt threatened by the expansionism, and this was the late 1950s and early 1960s. In Iraq, in the modern era, originally Iraq was friendly towards the United States and the United States friendly towards Iraq because Iran's expansionism and the Iran-Iraq War. The United States became fearful of Iraq because of its expansionism when Iraq attacked Kuwait and tried to take it over. And that was the late 1980s and early 1990s. In the early 1960s, the United States government decided to create fake propaganda by pretending that the North Vietnamese had attacked its warships, the Gulf of Tonkin being one example. So the United States took advantage of this and launched what they called justified attacks on Vietnamese bridges and radar stations, etc. These attacks were in fact real, but the Vietnamese had never attacked the United States warships. This was to gain acceptance for American aggression from the United States public. And the United States public supported the war in Vietnam initially because they believed the lie. And what happened was that eventually a reporter, and I believe it was for Time magazine, had broken the story that the United States had actually, or the United States government had actually made up these attacks, invented them to justify their war. And the same thing occurred years later with Iraq. The United States government made up the weapons of mass destruction, placed the ideal into the minds of the American public. The American public supported the war against Iraq on a false pretense, and when it was uncovered that the weapons of mass destruction did not exist, that it was in fact invented by the United States government, the United States population turned against their government's support of the war. And as we saw at the end of the Vietnam-United States War, the American public got rid of the Republican Party and voted for the Democrats. And the same thing occurred again with regards to the Iraq-United States War. The American public turned against the Republicans and voted in the Democrats. So here's a situation that has repeated itself, but rhymes because there's slight differences in the situation. Now what that means basically is that history, either at the microcosm in your life or history in the macrocosm in the history of the world, continually goes into the circular pattern that repeats itself. And because of this situation, you should be able to notice in your own life when your situation in your life is beginning to repeat itself again. And you should notice that slight differences are occurring, but occurring in different ways, but the basic outcome is always the same. For example, if you're involved in a relationship in the past and you had ignored your feelings for this girl, or you had decided that you go left instead of right in your decision making, well, when it comes to the situation repeats itself again, you should be able to notice that the same situation is occurring. There's slight differences, but you should be able to recognize that and then take the situation into your hands so that the outcome is not the same, that it is in fact in your favor. So instead of losing the girl because of inactivity or wrong decision making or being hesitant, you should, when you see the situation approaching again, do the opposite and don't be hesitant. Make the decision you need to make. Get in there and capture that girl. Eventually she becomes yours instead of you're losing her again. Once you recognize that this situation occurs, take this pattern, see if it's repeating itself again. Make the changes that you need to make so that your outcome will be in your favor.
Extreme ways are back again, extreme places I didn't know. I broke everything new again, everything